Good morning. Well, I trust that you've already had a good morning. I know that I have. And I have really been looking forward to this morning of being here and not only sharing with you, but there's just something special about seeing everyone gathered together like we are this morning. So this morning, I'm going to be representing Souls for Him Ministries, and I've chosen to do that in two different ways. One, I'm going to be, as I'm sharing a little bit about Souls for Him, I have some photos that I'm going to be showing, and then it's also going to be some just experiences that we've had. Because as I thought about it, I've had different people that have asked me over the years, what do you do and what does it look like and all of that. And a lot of times I'm hesitant to share like personal things that happen when we're out and about doing things for fear that it looks like I'm bragging. But this morning I felt like maybe I need to share some things that have happened over the years because you as a church have played a huge role in Elsie and in our ministry over the years. Light in the Valley has been our home church for many, many years, and you have faithfully supported us financially from the missions fund every month, and we really, really appreciate that. And so today, we want to give like a glimpse back to you from the last number of years of just some of the places we've been, some of the things that have happened, and then hopefully, I won't get too long-winded with that, because I also have a short message that I want to share with you that maybe gives you a little bit of a snapshot of maybe some of the type of messages I do, depending where I'm at. And the title of the message then this morning is Waiting on the Porch. So we'll see how it all comes together. So, Souls for Him was formed in 2008. We are a 501c3 nonprofit. Our ministry board consists of David Schwartzenschuber, Wayne R. Miller, and Dylan Troyer, which is from the church here. And I'm not sure if Dylan's had to leave already or not. They had another obligation. Are they here yet, or have they left? I know they were here earlier, and I had talked with them. That they left? Okay. Dylan and Liz are from the church here, and then, of course, I serve on the board as well. And our primary function is making disciples of Jesus Christ through renewal meetings in churches, outreaches, prisons, youth meetings. We also travel some internationally. We used to go about every year, and the last number of years now, sometimes it's every other year. We were in Kenya in 2019. This year it was this year in 2020. Yeah, in January of this year, we were in Kenya again. It doesn't look like we're going in 2021. A lot of things have changed with COVID-19. And so I primarily am a preacher. That's primarily what I do. I like to encourage people, challenge people, and help them to reach their full potential in Jesus Christ. And so the photos that you see, I think we had started off with the, if you could go back, I wasn't paying any attention to the photos Yeah, there you go. One of the things that we do is prisons. There's, I think, 2 slides for prison crusades that we do in South Carolina, Florida, as well as Pennsylvania. And there's been some really neat things that have taken place because of that. You can keep on rolling the slides, and I'll just do a little bit of talking. That photo right there was in Ghana, Africa. That was a church that meets. That was their meeting place under this big overhanging tree. And so, yeah, just keep on going. I'll talk too long on each of the photos. This was in Kenya, a church that I was ministering to there. There, a pastor received a Bible. We give out a lot of Bibles in Africa. And there, if you notice on the photo, they're touching Elsie's hair. It's a big thing for them, and for a lot of these kids, it's the first time they're seeing white people, and they want to touch our skin, and especially Elsie's hair, of how soft and silky it is compared to theirs. And so, yeah, the kids are always around them. Here's some Bibles that were handed out. We give out a lot of study Bibles, good quality Bibles like you'll see on our thing in the back. In every service, especially in Africa, you can't close a service without inviting people forward for prayer, and you can keep on scrolling. Prayer is a huge thing for them, and it's not. It might be for healing, it might be for finances, it might be for salvation. Who knows what it might be for? But they expect every service that you invite people to come up and receive prayer. And you don't have to beg. As soon as you open it up, I mean, there's just a steady stream that comes down. That was just this past January in Kenya. This was inside one of the homes that we had met. It was a hut with a thatched roof and a dirt floor, but really, really kind, hospitable people. Some of the Bibles that we had taken along and handed out, that was in January 2020. That's the pastor and his wife right there at the church where we were at. This is some Bibles that we had sent to Uganda with Pastor Jimmy's friend Willie. He took several suitcases of Bibles, study Bibles, along to Uganda when he went earlier this year. So I think on one of those slides you had seen, what's his name that was here and from, yeah, JB. This is at Bethel Camp. We always have a great time there. And speaking of Bethel Camp in the hollers of Kentucky, they have their Bethel Camp auction coming up September the 12th. If you want a fun day that will be very cross-cultural, we'd invite you to go to that. Elsie and I are taking another trailer load of things down, leaving tomorrow. And unfortunately, I won't be able to be at the fundraiser auction this year. I'm doing a wedding in Columbus on that same day. So, but Elsie will be there, so we'll be multitasking. Here's a Hispanic church in El Paso, Texas, that I'm overseer of. I serve as overseer of 4 different churches in the United States, one in Ohio, one in Virginia, one in Oklahoma, and one in Texas. And so some of our travels involve that, and being an overseer basically involves being a pastor to the pastor and somebody they can talk with, get counsel from. And so, yeah, I love what I do. This was a group of youth on the last slide there, from Hispanic youth that we had an incredible service that night. And at the end of the service, I invited the youth that would be willing to commit themselves to sexual purity until marriage to come up, and I want to pray for them. and virtually the whole youth group came up. And I tried to make it clear what they were, because these youth can all speak English, but it's a Spanish-speaking church. So I always speak through an interpreter when I'm there. But all of them, they said, we want what you're talking about. And so I feel like Elsie and I are one of these from our church, and there's a number of them from our church that are sent out. We're one of those that are sent out from our church that are doing ministry all over the place other than here in Holmes County. And this morning, I'm just trying to give you a brief overview of what we do. Is that the last one? I don't remember what all for slides I had put in. Is that it? Okay, that's it. So, all gifts that are given to Souls for Him are tax deductible. You can do online giving, or you can do it by check, whichever way you want. We have a website that actually, quite frankly, I'm not user-friendly with. Our son Greg updates it with our newsletters, but it's www.soulsforhim.com, and there's some newsletters on the table in the back, and the information is all on the bottom of that as well. We do a bi-monthly newsletter that gives information of where we've been and where we're going, that we a lot of times put in the church mailboxes. If you want to receive one at home or by way of email, there's a sign-up sheet on the back that you're welcome to do that. Before we formed Souls for Him in 2008, one day, I was pastoring at the time, and I had been sensing for some time that maybe one of these times God is going to open up the door, that instead of pastoring one congregation, that I would maybe be doing some traveling and preaching. And so the one day, as I was in my study at home, I had my study at home, and just as clear as could be, there was two words that just dropped into my spirit, and those two words were mobile ministry. And that was August the 27th of 2004. And I started over the years, when God would speak to me very specifically, a lot of times I made a note of it, a notation in my Bible, as well as the date. And over the years, it has helped me to go back and see, what did God say here? And so that was one of those days. But the timing wasn't right. And sometimes when we hear God speak to us, it doesn't mean that it's going to happen right now. And so we took counsel, we took time, and then it was formed in 2008. But prior to 2008, I was speaking at a pastor's conference in Paranki, India. And as I was getting there toward the end of I don't forget how many days it was, 3-4 days of the pastor's conference, one of the pastors came to me, and this was November the 10th of 2006. And he said, Pastor Phil, I feel like Jeremiah 1 and verse 5 is for you. I feel like the Lord wants me to share it with you. And this is the verse that he shared with me. I knew you before I formed you in your mother's womb. Before you were born, I set you apart and appointed you as my prophet to the nations. So it's times like that, people, and you don't have to wait till you're older to hear God speak. We have youth that have been very active, I believe, in hearing God speak. And at the end of the service today, we want to commission Sarah Beachy, that's going to be going to Albuquerque with Reach under Rosedale Missions. And many, last Sunday we had the young and gifted Phil Beatty up here. How many of you enjoyed that? Yeah, I really enjoyed that. And so when we have those mileposts in our life that God speaks to us, it's important to somehow journal it, write it down in your Bible, somehow make a notation of it, because there will be hard times, and it's good to be reminded. This is what God said here. And so, yeah, I feel like we are one of those, Elsie and I, that are sent out. And in Romans chapter 10, verses 13 to 15, it says like this: "For everyone who calls on the name of the Lord will be saved, but how can they call on him to save them unless they believe in him? And how can they believe in him if they have never heard about him? And how can they hear about him unless someone tells them? And how will anyone go and tell them without being sent? That is why the scriptures say, 'How beautiful are the feet of messengers who bring good news.'" I'm glad that Elsie and I are a couple from Light in the Valley that is sent out. And we're just enjoying it and having the time of our life doing it. And I had to think of a few other people from our church that also God has been sending out. This is Mission Sunday, okay? And I'm proud of Light in the Valley Chapel and the missional focus that our church has. We already alluded to Sarah. There have been many of our youth that have been in the REACH program, which is a 9-month program where they get some intensive training for 3 months in Columbus, Ohio. And then for 6 months, they go to some usually international place. But this year, because of COVID, they're having all of the groups here in the United States. But then they travel to various places where they do ministry on site for 6 months. So it's a huge opportunity. And I congratulate our youth, the many that have taken part of that. Pure Gift of God, Kurt and Erica, the great ministry that they do. And I'm not quite sure what the exact name of the organization is, but Dan and Becca, your organization that does all kinds of stuff in Uganda. The youth, local, just recently, you were doing all kinds of projects locally. I'm glad I'm part of a missional church. And Harold Shively does prisons that a lot of us never find out about. And he's actually very, very good at doing that. He can speak the lingo of the guy that's incarcerated. He grew up on the other side of the tracks, as it were. And he knows how to talk to them. And yeah, Alton Nisley, Operation 612. And the list could go on and on and on. But I want to share just a few things that help propel us on our journey. This was the first time that we went to Kenya in August of 92. I was fearful, filled with fear as we were flying across the ocean, and I was afraid I would never come back. And I was praying and asking God to give me something, and I opened my Bible. to Genesis chapter 28 and verse 15. And God spoke to me. He might as well have spoken audibly. I am with you and will watch over you wherever you go, and I will bring you back to this land. I will not leave you until I have done what I have promised you. And I remember that first time out in the village. We had been traveling for 24 hours. We got there, got settled in to bed, and it's like 8 hours time difference. They're ahead of us in time. And I got to bed at 2 a.m., was wide awake, couldn't sleep. I was dead tired. And the next morning I was supposed to preach. And we traveled about an hour out to a village. And I remember here these people were gathered in this little place. And they were expecting me to say something, and I felt like I am as empty as I've ever been. I have no idea what I'm going to say, and I was panicking. And one of the guys from our team, Dave Miller from Gospel Express, handed me a note just before I stood up to preach, and this is what it said. Let us therefore come boldly to the throne of grace, that we may obtain mercy and find grace to help in time of need. Hebrews 4:16. And there was just something, it gives me goosebumps still as I think about it. There was a supernatural something that took place that morning. And people were touched in spite of who I am. April the 12th of 2000, I was in a meeting with Bishop Titus Bai back in Mount Hope. And he spoke from Isaiah chapter 6 and verse 8. Also I heard the voice of the Lord saying, whom shall I send, and who will go for us? Then I said, here I am, send me. God spoke very clearly to me. That was in the year 2000. That God was asking me to go beyond the local church. And it's a process, people. That was 8 years before we actually launched Souls for Him. And as far as fundraising, it has been very, very low key. But somehow God, I've been full-time with Souls for Him now for about 10 years. It's where our income comes from. And somehow God just supplies. We don't do fundraiser banquets or that type of thing. I don't know. We never wanted Souls for Him to be about money. And so I guess we'll just kind of keep on going as long as the funds are there. And it's a great journey that we've been on. I remember speaking at a conference close to Columbus some years ago. And the evening that I was to speak, the place where we were staying, I was just sprawled out on the bed and just praying and asking God to help me that night. And I remember the words were kept coming back to me over and over again, Pentecost, Pentecost. That in the same way that God moved in Acts chapter 2, that God wanted to do that night. And so I just, as best I knew how, I surrendered. And that night, it was just there was just, heaven was open over that place. It was under a tent. And I remember there was so many people that came to the altar that night. And the following day, it was on the grounds there, and a man walked up and he said his wife would like to talk to me. And her name was Kim, and she come walking up to me there. Her eyes were all red from crying, and she looked at me and she said, last night, God spoke to me so clearly, and I saw for the first time last night that I've never given my heart to Jesus Christ. She said, I grew up in church. I'm now married. I have kids. But last night, she said, there was just a light bulb that came on in my life. And she said, I know when I got married. I know a lot of things, but I don't know. I can never remember a time when I felt like I became born again, a child of God. And she said, I was so embarrassed I couldn't come to the altar last night because after the service we had committed ourselves to praying. Another couple that had come with us to this conference, and we had committed ourselves to praying for a couple at home that aren't saved, that aren't Christians. And he said, we had a prayer meeting at midnight last night, and finally everybody in our group had prayed, but I still hadn't prayed, and I couldn't pray because I knew I wasn't saved, and I was so embarrassed to tell them. And finally, she said, I just blurted out to them, I'm not saved. I'm not a child of God, but I really, really want to be. And she said, my husband and the rest of the group, they just gathered around me and they started praying that God would touch me powerfully. And she said about 1 a.m. this morning, I got born again, and this big smile broke out on her, and she said, I know without a shadow of a doubt that if I would die right now, that I'd go to heaven. Because I had an experience last night that just totally changed my life. I remember being in a village in Kenya a few years back, studying to preach, and I had been really struggling because I had really been trying to just like really do some deep teaching. And I was struggling, and finally the one day, I was back at the place where we were staying, and I just surrendered it all to God, and I told God, you know what, if you want me to preach, then I'm just going to preach. I'm not going to worry about being all of the, point 1, 2, 3, all of that stuff, and I'm just going to be me the way you made me. And that night, there was just something that happened. It broke out. God's presence was so real and came down in such a powerful way. And at the end of the service, I don't know, there was a lot of people that had come up, and we had prayer time. And when that was finished, the moderator of the service, his name was Pastor John. Good brother. I had met him several years earlier in another village and always spoke through an interpreter to him. But he come up on the stage along with his interpreter, and he started speaking in fluent English. God is my witness. He started speaking in fluent English. He said, he was sitting like right down in through here. He said, when you were preaching, and you talked about, and from John chapter 6, of how that the little boy had the loaves of bread and the fish, and you had remarked how that what little he had, he gave to God so God could use it, and he multiplied it. And he said, when you were speaking, he said, I could feel that God was giving me the gift of the English language. And he's talking here. I was seated here. My interpreter was sitting beside me, and my interpreter jumped up. And he said, he's speaking in fluent English. God is my witness. That's the God that we serve. That's the God we serve, people. And sometimes it's so easy for us in our circles that are so cultured to put God in our own little box so that we limit what he can do. It was Jesus that said, I think it was in Capernaum, he said that he couldn't do many mighty miracles there because of their unbelief or the lack of faith. I've seen people healed instantly. And the list could go on and on and on. I remember driving past one of the local churches one day here, and sensing I should stop and pray for the pastor. And I figured, well, it's just probably me. Just something I'm thinking. I kept on driving, but the thought wouldn't go away from me, and finally I turned around and went back. Walked into church and went to the pastor's office and said, hey, I'm here. I just felt like when I drove past, I was supposed to stop and pray for you. Oh, he said, that's an answer to prayer, because he said, I'm supposed to preach tomorrow. This was on a Saturday afternoon. I'm supposed to preach tomorrow, and he said, I've got such a bad case of a hoarse throat, and I could barely hear him talk. And he said, I need prayer. So we just had our little prayer meeting right there. He called me up later and he said, 2 hours after you left, my throat was completely normal. And the next morning I could preach. People, that's the God we serve. That's the God we serve. And He's real. He's real. I remember a couple of years ago, 2 years ago I think it was, in the Pennsylvania Prison Crusade. I was supposed to, at the hotel club area hub where I was stationed, I was supposed to speak to the volunteers the one night. And I spoke to them about hearing the voice of God, that we can hear God speak today. And at the end of my time, I gave people opportunity to respond. And after that was finished and we had prayer, I started walking out, and one of the pastors that was serving as one of the evangelists there in that hub stopped me. And he said, could I talk to you outside in the hallway? And I said, sure. And he said, I really felt like I should have come up front and shared tonight, but he said, I just couldn't. Because he said, I just want to say that what you said tonight is so true. He said, a few years ago, I so clearly heard God speak to me the one day when I was driving. I came up to a stoplight in our local town, and it was just as real as could be that God said, I want you to make a right-hand turn and go and see this guy that lives in one of your rental houses. And he said, I didn't want to go. Because he said, I had spoken to him different times about the Lord, and he was a really nice guy. It was just a guy and his son that lived there. He was part of a local gang. And over the years, he'd been renting from him for a number of years now. And he had kind of developed a good relationship with him, but he wasn't a Christian. And he said, that day when I was sitting at that light, God clearly told me, I want you to make a right-hand turn and go over and talk to that guy. And he said, I didn't. Because I thought, well, my wife has supper ready at home, and she's waiting on me. I need to go home. He said, I went home, had supper with my wife, and 2 days later, this guy's gang shot this guy he was supposed to go and meet. Killed him. And he said, for the last 2-3 years, he said, I'm carrying that guilt and I can't get rid of it. Just maybe if I would have went and talked to him, he would have given his life to Christ. And so I said, you need to tell the rest of them your story, and we want to pray for you. He said, you think I still could? And I said, yes. And so by that time, they were just kind of doing some singing. They had a bunch of guitars there. And I went in and I said, hey, this brother has something he'd like to share. And so he shared that. And then we gathered around him and we prayed for him. And during the prayer time, and I want you to catch this, people. The Holy Spirit of God lives on the inside of us. And he helps us pray. During the time that we were praying, I felt God tell me, you need to tell him he needs to forgive himself. God has already forgiven you, but you've not forgiven yourself. And I started speaking that into him, and I said, brother, this is what I sense God is saying. No, he said, I haven't forgiven myself. And I said, would you be willing to forgive yourself? Yeah, he said, I'm willing to do that. And there, with all of us around there, he just prayed and said, God, I choose to forgive myself. And when he was finished, he was crying. And he said, the biggest burden has just lifted me, and I feel totally free. When you send Elsie and I out, this is just a little tip of the iceberg. I'm already out of time, and in that same area, I was at a federal prison where 70 nations were represented, and the chapel was packed. They had never had any type of meetings like this in there before. We were the first ones in. And I remember that one of the first days, I gave an opportunity to receive Christ and to receive special prayer. And literally all the inmates in the chapel got up and started coming forward. And I told them to stop and to wait because I thought they misunderstood me. I said, you don't understand. Don't come up here to make me feel good. The only way I want you to come is if you really felt God has been speaking to you and you need a touch from God today. You want to give your life to Christ, or maybe you've been on a detour. And if you still want to come, then come. Virtually the same amount of people came up. And by the time we had the last service on Sunday morning, they asked us if they can pray for us and our team. And we had a prayer meeting like I normally hear in Africa. Everybody was praying out loud at the same time, and there was such a holy presence that filled that place. It was absolutely incredible. I'm going to give you a 5-minute version of Waiting on the Porch from John chapter 5. And then I may give you an opportunity to receive special prayer this morning, because maybe you can identify with this guy in John chapter 5. Afterward, Jesus returned to Jerusalem for one of the Jewish holy days. Inside the city, near the sheep gate, was the pool of Bethesda with 5 covered porches. Crowds of sick people, blind, lame, or paralyzed, lay on the porches. One of the men lying there had been sick for 38 years. When Jesus saw him and knew he had been ill for a long time, he asked him, "Would you like to get well?" "I can't, sir," the sick man said, "for I have no one to put me into the pool when the water bubbles up." Someone else always gets there ahead of me. Jesus told him, stand up, pick up your mat, and walk. Instantly the man was healed. He rolled up his sleeping mat and began walking. But this miracle happened on the Sabbath, so the Jewish leaders objected. They said to the man who was cured, you can't work on the Sabbath. The law doesn't allow you to carry that sleeping mat. Lord Jesus, would you help me somehow in the next 3-4 minutes communicate what you want to communicate? It says that there were covered porches and there was crowds of sick people. They were blind, lame, or paralyzed. And I want you to know that it says there were crowds. And I had to think, why was there just one person that was touched? What made this one person different than all the rest of the people that Jesus singled out one person? And so as I thought about that, I mean, it was like, it says it was 38 years. And I guess one of the reasons that 38 stuck out to me is because on Friday, August the 28th, it was 38 years that I sat right down here along with Elsie and was ordained to the Christian ministry 38 years ago. And so, for this guy had been laying on this porch for 38 years, and the way I understand it, there was certain times that an angel would come down and he would touch the water so that the water would move or bubble, and the first one in would be healed. And he was never the first one in because he couldn't get there, and he had no one to help him in. Except this day was different. Because a stranger showed up, and Jesus simply asked him a simple question, would you like to get well? And I believe Jesus is asking us this morning, would you like to get well? And what would that look like for you? Maybe you've been carrying something like the guy in Pennsylvania. Maybe you've not forgiven yourself. Maybe you have a physical issue that you're dealing with that you would like to be healed from. Maybe it's a family issue. Maybe it's something with marriage. I mean, I have no idea. It just says that Jesus asked him, would you like to get well? And why did Jesus pick him? I believe that the reason that Jesus picked him is because he knew he was desperate for help. He wanted to be helped. And Jesus knew that he's never going to make it. He's never going to be the first one down there. Because there's others that are more mobile than him that are going to get there. And this morning I'm telling you that Jesus is available for each and every one of us here this morning. It's not just the first one down here. It might be the first one. It might be the 5th one or the 10th one. Or if nobody comes down, he's here. And he can touch us whether we're at home by ourselves or driving down the road or we're here this morning. But the important thing is that we respond when he calls. And Jesus simply looked at him and he said, do you want to be made well? Now he could have said, well, man, I'm just glad that you're here and at least somebody's recognized. Would you help me? Would you stick around and wait so that when that water moves the next time you can quick take me down there? But he didn't do that. Jesus just spoke to the need, and he said, be healed. Just simple, be healed. And I think Jesus is saying that to some of us here this morning. Be healed. He wants to touch you. And I don't know what that looks like for you. He just wants to touch you. Because he's the master. And when he shows up, everything changes. For this guy, he felt it in his body. And it says he jumped up. He rolled up his sleeping mat and he walked out, to the huge disappointment and anger of the religious leaders, because you weren't supposed to carry a sleeping mat on the Sabbath day. Instead of rejoicing with him, they found fault. And maybe you've been trying to get it right and people have been giving you a hard time. I just want you to know Jesus is on your side. Jesus is on your side, and he wants to touch you. So maybe you're here this morning and you want to receive the touch of Jesus. In Matthew 11:28, Jesus said, "Come to me, all you who are weary and carry heavy burdens, and I will give you rest."